This question asks us to describe the process of osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water across a membrane. Solutions will always try to come to be equal in concentration, and sometimes that can be accomplished by moving particles back and forth. That's a process called diffusion. However, if there's a membrane in the way, those particles are stuck on one side or the other, and water needs to move instead. So we can consider three different situations. First, we might have an isotonic solution, and this is where the concentration inside the cell equals the concentration outside the cell. In this case, you'll have some water flowing across the membrane, but because the two concentrations are equal, you won't have a net movement of water one way or the other. The second situation to consider is a hypotonic solution. This is where the concentration outside the cell is much less than the concentration inside the cell. What's going to happen here is water is going to flow into the cell in an attempt to dilute the cell and in an attempt to concentrate the outside solution. The net effect of that is going to be the cell is going to swell up and there'll be a net movement of water in. Finally, you can consider a hypertonic solution. This is a situation where the concentration outside of the cell is much greater than the concentration inside the cell. What's going to happen here is water is going to flow from the cell out. That's going to be in an attempt to dilute the environment and to concentrate the cell. There's a net movement of water out of the cell. It's going to cause the cell to shrivel. Again, if there were not a membrane in the way, particles would be free to flow back and forth across the cell. But because there is a membrane, instead we get this process of osmosis instead of diffusion. Lastly, remember that things can only be hypotonic, hypertonic, or isotonic if you're comparing two solutions. A solution by itself simply has a concentration, but if you compare two, you can use one of those three terms to describe two or more concentrations relative to one another.